It's one of the most chilling openings in music history, a melody that sounds like a funeral procession, a voice drenched in regret, and lyrics so cryptic, so surreal, they've confused listeners for over half a century. We skipped the light fandango. What does that mean? This isn't just another psychedelic anthem. This isn't just 60s poetry gone wild. This is a message. Coded in Baroque melodies and ancient literature, it was born from obsession, fueled by guilt, and wrapped in a web of sex, betrayal, and maybe something even darker. Was it about a real woman? Was it about sin? Or was it a desperate attempt to exorcise something the writer couldn't admit out loud? Whatever the truth is, the people who made it never agreed on what it meant, and one of them spent decades trying to take credit for music he may not have written. This is the story of a song that made the whole world stop and left it questioning everything. You're watching Behind the Hit, where we unravel the untold stories, scandals, and secrets behind the songs that shape the world. Hit subscribe and tap the bell, because trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. Now, let's go back to the summer of 1967, London, spring 1967. The world was changing. The Beatles had just dropped Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. Jimi Hendrix was setting guitars on fire, and the youth of Britain were tuning in, turning on and dropping out. But while the rest of the music world was pushing louder, faster, and wilder, a strange song emerged from the shadows. No drums, no guitar solos. Just a slow, haunting organ riff that sounded more like a requiem than a rock single. That song was A Whiter Shade of Pale. But here's what most people don't know. This wasn't the work of seasoned stars. This was the debut of a band that barely existed yet. Procol Harum wasn't even supposed to be a band. It was more like a spontaneous experiment thrown together by a quiet singer-pianist named Gary Brooker and a reclusive poet named Keith Reid. Reid didn't play an instrument. He didn't sing. He rarely gave interviews. And yet, he handed Brooker a strange set of lyrics written in a style no one had seen before. Lines that sounded more like Shakespeare drunk on absinthe. We skipped the light fandango, turned cartwheels, crossed the floor. What was this? A dream? A drug trip? A breakup? Brooker didn't ask. He sat down at the piano, and what he played would change their lives forever. That now iconic melody? It wasn't just original. It was borrowed from the 18th century. Brooker admitted later that the descending organ line was inspired by Bach's Sleepers Awake, and musicologists have noted striking similarities to Air on the G string. But here's the twist. At the time, Bach's compositions were public domain, no lawsuit, no permission needed. Still, critics and musicians alike questioned, was this a tribute or theft? And deeper still, why did this mix of old European classical music and cryptic poetry suddenly strike a nerve with an audience that was high on rock and rebellion? The answer: no one had ever heard anything like it. In May 1967, the song was released in the UK on the tiny Daram label, a Decca Records subsidiary. No press tour, no hype, just a whisper across the airwaves. By June, A Whiter Shade of Pale was #1 on the UK charts. By July, it had sold over 10 million copies worldwide. But even as it climbed the charts, the song was already dividing critics. One BBC radio producer wrote in a 1967 internal memo, later released via the UK National Archives, "This track has a hypnotic effect that borders on manipulation. Its lyrics appear nonsensical, but evoke something disturbingly intimate." Some BBC affiliates tried to limit its airplay. Why? Because no one could explain it, and that scared them. Let's talk about those lyrics. And although my eyes were open, they might have just as well been closed. As the miller told his tale, every line feels like it means something. But the moment you try to pin it down, it slips through your fingers. What's a whiter shade of pale, anyway? Is it someone getting ghostly sick? A metaphor for shame, death, purity, intoxication? Theories poured in. Some said it was a song about a breakup in a bar where two lovers slowly watch each other fall apart under the influence of alcohol and bitterness. Others said it was an allegory for spiritual loss, a soul turning pale as it drifts away from faith. And then there were the academics. Yes, academics. A 1981 paper in the British Journal of Cultural Studies argued that Reed's lyrics were a direct allusion to Geoffrey Chaucer's The Miller's Tale, a bawdy story about lust, deception, and a man who gets humiliated for trusting too easily. Reed confirmed in later interviews, yes, that reference was intentional. But here's the thing, he never explained why. Keith Reed wasn't like other songwriters. He wasn't interested in fame or performance or even explanation. He wrote lyrics like riddles he never planned on solving. He once admitted that a whiter shade of pale came to him after hearing a single line in casual conversation. A friend had said someone looked a whiter shade of pale. He wrote it down instantly, and then he disappeared into it. But Reed didn't just pull strange metaphors from thin air. He was obsessed with 19th century French poetry, Baudelaire, Rimbaud, the symbolists who believed that truth could only be told indirectly through atmosphere and suggestion. Their poems were filled with decay, lust, sickness, and hallucination. And Reed? He wanted to bring that same unease into rock music. He said that the lyrics weren't about a clear story. They were about a mood, a collapse. The moment when a person realizes something precious is gone and it might never come back. But even if Reed didn't offer clarity, fans kept searching. There were theories about drugs, of course, LSD, heroin, absinthe, all swirling in a psychedelic haze. And then there were the religious readings. Lines like, "As the miller told his tale," struck some listeners as biblical, even if it came from Chaucer. Others pointed to the washed-out imagery, whiter, paler, as a reference to spiritual bleaching, as if the narrator had lost his moral compass and was now seeing the world in drained tones. One Anglican priest wrote in a 1973 church bulletin that the song captured the profound loss of innocence in the modern soul. But no matter how people interpreted it, something deeper began to unravel. Behind the song's beauty, there was chaos. The first crack came just a few months after its release. Despite the enormous success, Procol Harum was spiraling. For starters, they didn't have a stable lineup. By the time they played live shows, the original studio musicians had already changed. They struggled to even define what kind of band they were. Were they rock, classical fusion, art pop, psychedelic? But the real storm was about to hit, and it would last for decades. In 2005, nearly 40 years after A Whiter Shade of Pale was released, an organist named Matthew Fisher filed a lawsuit in the Royal Courts of Justice in London. Wasn't asking for recognition as a performer. He was demanding co-writing credit. Fisher claimed that the song's signature melody, the Bach-inspired organ part, was his creation, and therefore he deserved to be listed as one of the songwriters and receive royalties for life. At the time, A Whiter Shade of Pale had generated millions in publishing rights. Giving Fisher credit would cost the band a fortune. Gary Brooker, who'd been listed as the sole composer, fought back hard. He said the melody came from a mutual understanding that Fisher had contributed as a musician, not a composer. But Fisher wasn't backing down. And in 2006, the court ruled in his favor. The judge wrote that Fisher's contribution was significant and original, and that he was entitled to 40% of the composition royalties from that day forward. It was one of the most high-profile copyright cases in music history, and it set a precedent that still ripples through the industry today. But for fans, it opened up a more existential question. If even the people who made the song couldn't agree on who wrote what, then who exactly does the meaning belong to? And still the mystery deepened. Procol Harum would go on to release other records. Some were critically praised, some flopped, but none, not one, ever came close to a whiter shade of pale. It was a blessing and a curse. They were forever chained to a ghost. Even in interviews decades later, Brooker was still being asked what the song meant. He would dodge the question. Reed would give a vague smile. Sometimes he'd say it was about a real relationship. Sometimes he'd deny it outright. In one rare moment, he admitted he had written the lyrics while reflecting on a relationship he had ruined. But even then, he stopped short of confirming any literal reading. And maybe that's the key, because a whiter shade of pale isn't meant to be solved. It's meant to be felt. It's the ache of something you don't have the words for, the aftermath of beauty, the taste of regret, but without knowing what you regret most. And so it endured. The song has been covered by over 1,000 artists across 5 decades: Elton John, Joe Cocker, Annie Lennox. It was played at funerals, weddings, and war memorials. It was inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame in 1998, and in 2004, it was named the most played record on British radio over the last 75 years. It outlasted the band. It outlasted the lawsuits. It even outlasted the people who made it. Keith Reed passed away in 2023. Gary Brooker died a year before. And now the song they made together, that strange, holy accident, is all that's left. You can't explain a whiter shade of pale. You can only sit in it. Let it move through you, like a memory you can't quite place, like a feeling you almost remember, but just can't. What makes a song timeless? Is it chart success, cultural saturation, or is it something quieter, something harder to measure? A whiter shade of pale is not a song you understand. It's a song you absorb. You don't sing it at karaoke. You don't blast it from car speakers. You hear it in empty halls, in long nights, in moments when words fail. It was released at a time when pop music was supposed to be loud and literal, about rebellion, lust, or joy. But this was music for what came after the party, when the lights go dim, when your head starts to spin, when you wonder if you've lost something forever and you're not even sure what it was. The paradox is brutal. A Whiter Shade of Pale is one of the most famous songs of the 20th century, and yet its creators spent most of their lives trying to escape it, or understand it, or reclaim it in court. Gary Brooker, whose voice gave the song its shattered soul, was haunted by it until his death. In interviews, he seemed both proud and resentful. He once said, "That song was like a hurricane. We weren't ready. No one was." Keith Reed, the poet who gave it words, retreated from the spotlight almost entirely. He never became a household name. He never chased pop stardom. He just kept writing, quietly, privately. And when asked what the song meant, he would usually answer with another question. Because maybe not knowing is the point. Maybe the entire power of the song comes from what it doesn't say. There's a term in literature called negative capability. It means being comfortable with uncertainty, mystery, and doubt. The phrase was coined by John Keats, who believed that great art wasn't about delivering answers. It was about making peace with the fact that you may never get them. A Whiter Shade of Pale is a masterpiece of negative capability. It makes you feel like you've forgotten something crucial, like you're on the edge of revelation, but never quite able to reach it. And that is why it still matters. It speaks to the part of us that aches for resolution, but lives in ambiguity, the part that loses people we love, that forgets faces, then dreams about them years later. That hears a song from long ago and suddenly feels something break loose inside, the greatest trick the song ever played? It convinced the world it had meaning, when in fact it was the space between meanings that gave it power. That's what made it dangerous to censors. That's what made it a beacon for lost souls. and that's why it will outlive every explanation we try to assign it. Because mystery, when done right, isn't frustrating. It's sacred. So maybe the next time you hear it, in a movie, on a radio, floating through a cafe at closing time, you won't ask what it means. Maybe you'll just listen to the ache, to the beauty, to the silence between the lines. Because some songs don't tell a story. They are the story.
As a ceiling away.
Buried inside it. If you felt something in this story, if this song has ever haunted you or comforted you or made you pause, hit that subscribe button and leave a comment below. What do you think A Whiter Shade of Pale is really about? New episodes drop every week. Until next time, don't just hear the music. Look behind it.